There we go. Now we're
Live.
Now we are live.
Live and in person.
In person, 6 foot separation between us. And I'm speaking, if I was in the Army, I would call this my artillery voice, because I'm not mic'd, but Andy is. So
And Andy doesn't have an artillery voice.
Just talk loud!
Yeah, no. My daughter this morning was, we went to pick up donuts for Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers out there.
Awesome.
And we went to pick up donuts as a special treat. And my daughter was saying something, and I was explaining it, clarifying. And she goes, "Daddy, why are you being stern?" And I thought, oh, I didn't realize I was being stern. You're right. I'm sorry. But that's as close as I get to artillery voice. Stern, yeah, which is a boating term, so it's not even in the right branch at that.
So what are your plans here?
Well, it's great to be back. Thanks for being flexible the last couple of weeks, and yeah, we're thrilled. We're thrilled to be here. I've been reflecting on where we've been, and I feel like what we're engaging in is kind of two different projects. So if I can create an analogy, and obviously all analogies fall apart if you push it, but be pleased. It's not a Trinity analogy, so I'm not leading us down some strange road there. But I feel like partly what we're doing in this class is we're surveying the Bible. Okay, so it's kind of like we're introducing ourselves to terrain, and we're taking kind of this topographical view, and we're treating some special places in there, taking note of that's a particularly steep hill. That's kind of one project we're doing. We're also kind of in the midst of surveying that terrain, building a house. We're constructing a theology, so to speak, of how to engage with that terrain. So that's where the analogy breaks down, because the house we're building isn't just a feature of the terrain. We're trying to actually see the terrain better by crafting a house. So we walked in and we marked out a territory. I defined covenant as a bond in blood, sovereignly administered. It's a binding thing on pain of death, administered by God. In the midst of that, we defined a field. And that's kind of the construction business. Then maybe we looked at architectural plans, and I walked through covenant theology as a scope. Here's the house we're going to build. And then we started entering, I'll mix another metaphor. We entered the land, so to speak. The conquest began in that sense. And so I've just been reflecting. The fact that we're trying to do both of these projects means that in some ways we're doing both, and in some ways we're doing neither. This is neither going to be a full survey of the Bible, nor is it going to be an exhaustive approach to covenant theology. Okay. And so, maybe that analogy makes sense at that point.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So what we've done then is we've kind of begun building this house. So we've talked about God's covenantal relationship with Adam and the covenant of works, wherein created perfect, created righteous, but created with the ability to fall, suspect to the possibility of fall, and then given the command. And we would say that command is both the moral law and the special command not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And having failed that, then sin enters the world, and what we've been dealing with the rest of our time so far then is maybe phase 2 of construction, which is the covenant of grace, God's special covenant through Christ to his people, to redeem them from their sin and to make right the fall and the covenant of works.
Keep that thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to check the... Okay.
We're live?
I I mean, it says we are, and I'm gonna take its word for it. If any of you see that we're not live or you can't see a picture, text me, please.
Yeah. Ouch. Last week, my phone, or last time we were here, my phone kept going off as random people texted me. So I'm going to move the phone and not be disturbed. And perhaps we've then talked about Adam, Noah, and Abraham, and building this framework, this house, in the midst of this terrain, and surveying the Bible. And so perhaps you guys have questions about some of those things. You're welcome to ask them in this time. And I commend to you those lessons, which are recorded, and they're on the Twin Oaks Church Facebook page, and they're also on the Twin Oaks PCA YouTube channel. Okay. And so they're still accessible in that. And this brings us today. And we're live.
It looks great.
Great.
I'm told it looks great.
Great. Well, I'll do my best not to break down the looking great. That's what I'll do.
Generic.
Generic great. Got it. I can appreciate that. So perhaps as we've been moving through this material, some of you watching, or those of you watching recorded, have noticed it's not a usual terrain that we're in. There are steep hills. There are maybe places that look a little bit doom and gloom, and you're thinking, do we want to walk into that deep of a wood? Do we actually want to see this? And maybe some of you, since you started it with artillery, since you started it with artillery and then I got stern, we'll say maybe there's some landmines in this terrain. And there's ways in which people have approached both surveying the Bible and constructing covenant theologies, or any theology in general, wherein they've created landmines that you have to walk around in the land.
Are these like conundrums, or what?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good clarification. I should have come with a specific example in mind. Okay, here's an example coming from Moses, which is what we're going to move into here as soon as I stop meandering on our analogy. Some people look at Moses and they say, this is a covenant of law. And there are theologians that have said what's happened is God has flipped the way he relates with people. God has stopped being the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the same covenant of promise way, and he's started being this law-keeping God. And it's left this kind of giant landmine in the terrain such that now I have to decide how we walk around it. Okay. Whereas, had that not happened in the history of theology, I would have just trucked on.
Well, actually, this is kind of my area because I was an engineer.
Yeah.
So landmines. If I could make, there's three things you can do with a landmine. Okay, you can mark it and avoid it. Mm-hmm. Right. You can blow it in place, just destroy it, or you can disarm it. Now, of the three, disarming is the trickiest, most dangerous. But in the end, if you want to show people this is how a landmine is in place, and this is what you need to look out for, you want to do that if you can. Yeah. Get a robot to do it if you can. But blowing it in place is that's the sledgehammer.
That's right.
Avoiding it, or marking it and avoiding it, allows you to speed through. Yeah. So it sounds like you're gonna dismantle it, maybe. Yeah. In some cases.
Yeah, we're gonna do both. In essence, I'm saying that to say the presence of those landmines has shaped the way I want us to move forward. And some of those I'm going to name as we walk past, and I'm going to say, really just don't step there. Yeah. And some of them, we're going to dig up. I don't know anything about landmines, so this will be totally destroying how you actually do this. Some of them we're going to dig up and we're going to analyze and then set aside. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to do our best. I brought the engineer. Yeah. So that's why we're here. So, and actually some of these landmines we're going to walk up to and we're going to look at them and realize they're just rocks. And we're just gonna say I was a dud that never was gonna go off anyway.
Decoys are a legitimate form of landmine.
Yeah.
Of mine warfare.
Yeah.
Because it makes you stop and slows you down.
Yeah.
You got to make sure that it's really.
That's right. Yeah. So with that in mind, I want to introduce a framework that we're going to use to do this. And this is not a framework I've invented. This is actually the most common framework for talking about covenants. I'm going to introduce the concepts of substance and administration. So by substance, and realistically what I'm drawing on is actually the history of theological thought from millennia past. And there's a sense in which in all types of theological development, substance, administration, consequences, actions, reason, logic, all of these kinds of terms have been used by the church as tools. And so that's how you can see this as a tool we're going to use, a pickaxe, so to speak, to go through the terrain as we analyze. Substance and administration. So the substance of a covenant is its essence. It's that which, if you removed, it would no longer be this covenant, so to speak. The substance is that which makes it what it is. We can do some analogies, right? I am a person. That's who I am in my substance. I'm a person made in the image of God. If you remove the image of God from me, you've removed the substance. I'm no longer a person. I would then be some other type of creature, but not a person. And the other concept we're going to use is administration. And so that's kind of how, in talking about covenants, other theological frameworks. So if we were talking about, say, the person of Christ, and we wanted to make the same distinction, we would talk about the substance, and then we'd talk about action. With covenants, though, it's substance and administration. Or if we were doing this with strict logic, we'd talk about substance versus consequence in that kind of way, or substance versus circumstance. Could be some different distinctions. So we're going to separate what the essence of this covenant with Moses is from how that's administered, how it comes to us, as well as what it performs. So easy examples of administration with Moses are sacrificial system, the institution of the regulations of the Passover, case law, building of the tabernacle. All of those kinds of things are administrative aspects of the covenant, but it's not its substance in that sense. Now they're tied, so I'm making a distinction that we'll bring together again next week. But today I want us to ask the question, what's the substance of God's covenant with Moses? What essentially defines it at its core? And I think the question makes sense.
I guess that's a key question on any covenant, right?
Yeah.
And will we find distinctions and differences in Scripture as well as similarities between covenants?
Yeah.
And substance? Yeah.
So basically in covenant theology, the nature of any landmine is either deciding it's too discontinuous, it's too different, or deciding it's too continuous and not seeing its nuances. So that's kind of the road we're going to try and walk down. We're going to focus on the substance. So if you have your Bible with you, you can open your Bible, or you can pop open a new tab, as long as that doesn't shut down your Facebook. I don't even know how that works. And we left off in Genesis 17, and don't worry about turning back to Genesis 17. Like I said, we're neither doing a full survey nor a full building project, so I'm going to jump us from Genesis 17 to Exodus chapter 3. And let me just fill in that gap briefly. If we were doing a full biblical survey, then what we'd see is that the covenant that was promised and enacted with Abraham through the dividing of animals and passing through the bond and blood, then gets continued, not redone, remade, but continued with Isaac. And then the same thing happens with Jacob. And so that's where Israel, then Jacob gets renamed Israel, and the 12 tribes go. And then we'd see the story of Joseph and the famine, wherein God uses incredibly difficult circumstances that you would look at and think everything is going wrong with God's promises to God's family, this family of Israel that he's chosen. Everything is falling apart. The brothers have sold the one into slavery, but God was actually using it to preserve the people and bring them to safety in Egypt. And we did actually look in Genesis 15 at the future picture. God had told Abraham, who was then Abram, your descendants are going to sojourn in the land for 400 years. So we're picking it up in Exodus 3, where 400 years have passed.
Just as that 400 years is flexible. In other words, it's not necessarily exactly precisely 400 years. It's more of a framework.
Yep.
Could be 440. Could be.
Yep. Yeah, that's helpful to know, because essentially what we're doing is a project in deciding which glasses to use in reading the Bible, and one of the things we're trying to use is use the Bible's glasses for reading itself, in essence. And so there's, the term 400 is convenient and close, but it may not be exact, and we don't need to fall on that.
Angst over that.
Yeah. So in Exodus chapter 3, we've been introduced in Exodus 1 and 2 to a boy now become a man named Moses, who, in the same way that Noah passed into the ark and was delivered through it, Moses got put in a small ark in the river and delivered into the safety of Pharaoh's house.
I've always thought it was interesting. They were both coated with pitch.
Yeah. Which as a kid I had no clue what it meant, but go pitch.
Total aside, but what kind of a place is it that you can just get asphalt anywhere?
Yeah.
It's just in your backyard.
Yeah.
Go to the asphalt pit.
Coat it with pitch. Yeah.
Give me a bucket of pitch.
Yeah. Well, different from where I grew up. That's what kind of place, that's for sure. And what's happened is that Israel is now being oppressed by pharaohs that don't remember the history of how God used Joseph even to protect the Egyptians. And they're oppressing the people in quite difficulty. And Moses he's actually killed a man, in part seeking to rescue some Israelites that were in conflict. So you can see good things about his heart in that, and you can see that not a good call to have tried that. And Moses has fled for his life to Midian, and he is now shepherding sheep. So he's gone from being a prince, so to speak, in Pharaoh's house to a shepherd in the middle of Midian. So Exodus chapter 3, we're not going to read the whole thing, but I want us to get a sense here, and this is just an amazing story. Now, Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why, the bush is not burned. And you think, good on you, Moses. Thanks. Thanks for giving us the insight into the story here. As one does, you see a bush burning that's not being destroyed. Verse 4, we see this is kind of you brought up booby traps, so we'll call it a booby trap. This is kind of a booby trap. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. And just to pause, here I am is this beautiful phrase throughout the Old Testament, Cheneani, and it's instant glimpse. This is like a hashtag, so to speak, that lets us know Moses is one to pay attention to. Moses is about to respond in a way that God likes. Here I am. And so it's this beautiful glimpse into Moses. If we hadn't had it already, that he was somebody to pay attention to, this is okay, watch what happens. He said, here I am. Verse 5, then he, the Lord, said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You asked about continuity versus discontinuity. Look at the beautiful continuity. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's saying, I'm not a foreign divinity to you and your people. I'm not distinct. What's about to happen is a continuation of the story with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's this beautiful insight at the start that Moses is one responding like Abraham responded, and God is one who's going to treat him in light of his relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's the setup of the situation. Verses 7 to 10 then give us the background. So if you're wondering, Andy, why is God choosing now? Why is God, after 400 years, is it arbitrary? Was it an arbitrary 400 years, or why? God is about to give us the answer, verses 7 through 10. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen, one sense, you get to see many of the senses here, seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I'm sure Dr. Beneke made much of this as he was walking through Exodus and the other adult Sunday school class. But what a beautiful glimpse into who God is. Sees, knows, hears. He's come down with a purpose to deliver them. He's come down with another purpose to bring them up. Not just does he hear and see what they're doing and their cry, he wasn't blind to it. He actually saw and heard what was happening to the Egyptians as well. The cry of the people has come. I've seen the oppression, verse 9, with which the Egyptians oppressed them. And he's come with a mission for Moses. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh to accomplish this. It's the background. It's a sense of God not as a distinct one. Sometimes in culture, God is depicted as, grandpa in the sky. That, maybe he's lost a little bit of his sharpness, and so he's just being a little bit kind with everybody. This God is sharp and with it.
Well, and he's also, there's no fewer than 3, depending on how you count them, might be 4 or 5, my people,
yeah.
People of Israel.
Yeah.
He's not a distant, arm's length God.
Yeah, that's right. His heart is what's engaged. And he's coming now to make good on his covenant with Abraham. And he's coming to continue accomplishing the redemption of his people out of sin and misery. Then verses 11 and following give us this first glimpse into Moses. But Moses said to God, just pause. Just pause. Imagine responding. Imagine responding. But Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God replied, I will be with you, And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So what's the sign that it's going to happen? He's first given. It'll be done. How do you know? It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Wow.
Yeah, you'll know that it was me that sent you when it's accomplished. And you might think that's an interesting response, but it's that certain in God's heart. Also notice, don't lose sight of the phrase, I will be with you. That's been one of the key things we've latched on at what it means to be in covenant relationship with God. It's the God who's with us and the God who delights to have us with him as his people. And it's also linked with the key phrase that everybody fixates in the next couple of verses. Yeah. You look like you were going to say something.
That just blows me away that normally you think of a sign as something that that you'll get before you start the task.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sign will be that you'll finish it.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah. And I love this. The sign is that you'll finish it in such a way that the people will serve God. Not just that you'll get free from the land, but you'll actually be a people serving me, worshiping me, praising me on this mountain when it's done. So it's going to be done, and it's going to be done in a way that impacts the people and draws them to relationship with God. They will behold who he is.
And I suppose Moses, having spent all this time as a shepherd, knows how difficult it is to get crowds of anything
to do anything.
And to predict where they're going to be in the next hour and what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, that's right. And good on Moses. Again in verse 13 he replies, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And this is a beautiful question. One thing to notice, right? I'm teasing that how can Moses be talking to God? But consider that God is one who invites being spoken with. He's a God who appears not just to shut it down and move on, but he's a God who appears and actually welcomes response. So that we don't have to conclude Moses is responding perfectly, right? In fact, he gets rebuked for his response at several points throughout his relationship with the Lord. But consider that God is one who invites response, and he welcomes you to engage with him. So then Moses asks this question, what is his name? What shall I say? God, I don't know if I actually know much about you. Name often equals or is related to character. We kept making comments throughout our first couple of live streamed, Facebook Live studies. Well, this name means this, and it says this about this person. Well, in some ways, Moses is asking me, what's your character? How can I give them assurance? Because maybe telling them it's going to be done isn't going to be enough. Maybe if I say, well, it's going to happen, buddy, they're not going to know what that means. And so God said to Moses, verse 14, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And you'll see every English Bible I've ever seen on this verse has a footnote after it that says, or it might be saying I am what I am, or it might be saying I will be what I will be. It's connected in Hebrew. The words that are used are connected with verse 12, I will be with you. And here's a contemporary landmine. Here's a landmine that theologians that discuss who God is, people who study theology proper, the doctrine of God, they're arguing about this phrase. And one camp is saying what God is saying here is he's describing his essence. I am the God who always has been. I am the existent one. I exist. I self-exist, yeah. The other camp is saying it would be ridiculous for a God who is speaking to say, I exist. And why would that be meaningful to Moses, who's having a conversation with this God. Rather, we should see it as presence. He's saying, I am the God who is with you, present with you. And this is a landmine that I think is a rock. I think God is saying both of these things. He is both saying, I'm the covenant God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is with you and promising to be with you. My presence is the sign. My presence is going to be what's visible. My presence is what's going to accomplish this. And he's saying, I am the self-existent one. The reason I can argue this, in part, is because Jesus uses it both ways. In John chapter 8, verse, I didn't look this back up, 58, John 8, 58, Jesus is arguing with some Jews, and he turns to them and he says, before Abraham was, I am. And he's making a comment about essence. He's making a comment about what it means to be God. Jesus is saying, I'm that one, the self-existent one, the one that always has been, is, and always will be. And Jesus uses the phrase, I am, repeatedly to say things like, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the bread. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am. And theologians argue as to whether he's invoking this every time he says, I am. He is often treated like he's invoking this most of those times in response. He'll say something like, I'm the resurrection and the life, and some people rejoice and some people will gather stones and say it's time to go. You've blasphemed. And certainly when he said before Abraham was, I am, the response was, it's time to enact the blasphemy law in this instance. So I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. God is the one who's revealing himself as the covenant God of Scripture, who exists in and of himself. He's subject to none, Lord over all, in that sense. I am who I am. And so that's the response he's supposed to go with. So this is about revealing God and about rescuing the people. And we can stop the reading of the text here. What happens is Moses continues to question, well, what? Me? Really? Really? And I respect that. I respect that response greatly. And God gives him other signs. The first sign is it's going to happen. It's going to happen in a way that you're going to serve me. The next sign is, well, grab that staff, your shepherd's staff, throw it on the ground, and it becomes a snake, and then grab it again, and it becomes a stick again. Owen, my 4-year-old, and I were talking about this yesterday because he's actually really afraid of snakes. He doesn't like them at all. And we were reading this story in the children's Bible, and he was like, yeah. He touched it? Oh, man. Yeah.
Just as an aside for the I am, it's interesting how almost any language you look at, the verb to be is got the widest semantic range. It's the one that's the most difficult to conjugate. It's just in the use of it, it's been fully explored within any language.
Yeah.
And really, really teased out no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. So Moses is given these signs, and then again, not a complete survey nor a complete construction project. I'm going to skip the 10 plagues. So what happens is the mighty hand of God accomplishes what the mighty voice of God said would be accomplished, and so we know the stories. He sends gnats, he sends flies, he sends frogs. He turns the river to blood. I'm no way going in order, by the way. The boils, sickness, crops, darkness. I'm skipping a major one. I'm not thinking. Hails. Yeah, I was like, the crops get destroyed somehow. Yeah, hail. And then in Exodus 11, the 10th plague is threatened. And so what we've seen in this process is God displaying who he is over and above the gods of Egypt. Though we can't map each one of these, I've never heard anybody map each one to one with an Egyptian god. most of them can be mapped directly to God is confronting the gods of Egypt and saying, who are you to enslave my people? They're mine, I'm bringing them out. And the 10th one is kind of the confrontation of Pharaoh himself in this instance. So it's threatening the death of the firstborn. And helpful to note, it's the death of every firstborn, including Israel. A lot of these plagues Israel got spared from. A lot of these plagues Israel suffered alongside, but a lot of these plagues Israel got spared from. The 10th one, he enacted.
I was thinking the plague of darkness, the sun was shining in Goshen.
Yeah.
But darkness everywhere else.
How did that look like? A flashlight in a dark room, or mist that you suddenly stepped out of into the sun? Will be fun in glory to ask. What did that actually look like? How was that done? And if you have questions about any of those, this is gonna be the mark and walk by. If you have questions on any of these, you can go talk to Dr. Beneke, who's been faithfully teaching the book of Exodus since the fall.
Go back to that. Yeah, those are all on YouTube as well.
Yeah. And then Exodus 12 is this picture of the Passover, and which actually gets described. I'm blanking. No, it's in 12 that it's described. And just going to gloss this because I actually want to move us to see. But the first thing you should see here is Exodus 12:2. This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year. He's redefining the calendar in light of the Passover. That's how catastrophic this event is. It reconstitutes when the year starts. It reconstitutes the very rhythm of their life, the Passover, wherein...
Are we to read into that anything? I mean, normally that's done, that's how you keep track when a new king reigns. Read that into it and all. Yeah. Not that they did a good job at remembering the Passover, right? We're gonna skip this whole section, but when Hezekiah reinstitutes the Passover, it had been hundreds of years since they'd done the Passover. But yeah, I mean, the design is this event is to be the pace setter for the entire year. Your year is to start with the remembrance of God brought us out of Egypt by the blood of the Lamb, because they're by family. We're still seeing all the way through this glimpses of God working through families, God impacting the way He interacts with the children in light of the parents. And we'll clarify that in a few weeks, but it's a rhythm that you can't miss. The Passover is done by family. In that instance, it redefines their calendar. And I actually thought maybe the best way to kind of summarize this would be to look at the Song of Moses in Exodus 15. Exodus 15 is this beautiful Song of Moses, and it's echoed in so many of the Psalms. And I commend, I don't know what tune it should be set to, but I would commend reading through the Song of Moses. And I certainly won't be singing it, and that's my Mother's Day gift to everyone, is Andy not singing. Exodus 15, halfway through verse 1, I'll sing to the Lord, for He has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider He's thrown into the sea. And actually, I know what tune we should sing. We did this at VBS last summer, and I can still picture the dance. Verse 2, the Lord is my strength and my song, and He has become my salvation. And we don't need to over-spiritualize it, but we don't need to under-spiritualize it either. The act of sacrificing a lamb and putting its blood over your doorpost in order to be delivered from the plague of the firstborn that ultimately results in rescuing the nation is an act of faith. And is that what you meant when you said that Israel was subject to this plague as well?
Yeah. It's kind of how many people who did the Exodus class are are listening to this also. If Israel didn't respond in faith and in obeying this sacrificial instruction, their firstborn would have died as well. And God actually, in light of this, claims the firstborn of all Israel in perpetuity. Your firstborn child belongs to the Lord, and actually you have to offer sacrifice on his behalf or her behalf, though I'm sure it would have only been viewed through boys at the time. But the firstborn belongs to the Lord. Yes, because it's on firstborn males. Forgive me. Has become my salvation. So it is a physical salvation out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery, out of all of these things. And it's commemorating their response of faith. It is a spiritual thing as well as a physical thing. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host he cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The flood covered them. I love that picture. What's just happened again is an enacting of Noah in some ways, where the line of Eve is being preserved on dry ground through the midst of a flood. It's a type of a flood, walking through the bottom of the ocean or a sea. And the line of the serpent pursuing them foolishly and in hatred and in attempt to either kill them or get them back by whatever cost, is judged by being covered with water, and they're covered with a flood. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power, your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. Listen, in the greatness of your majesty. Verse 8, at the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. Verse 9, the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy. Verse 10, you blew with your wind, and the sea covered them. Think of how meaningful of a rescue that must have been. How terrifying to be walking through a sea parted by the wind that blew from the nostrils of God. How terrifying. How terrifying further to then be chased by over 600 is the number in my head, over 600 chariots. We're talking women and children. We're talking old and young. We're talking fit and unfit, all walking through. How terrifying. And the Lord rescued them in one fell swoop. He delivered them. Verse 11, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? They got it. They got it. It was a conviction of Egypt's gods. Who's like you among the gods? Who's like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonder? You stretched out your hand, the earth swallowed them. It judged them. It judged them unfit of continuing on it. Verse 13, you've led in steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. You've guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples have heard, they tremble. Verse 15, now the chiefs of Edom, we're changing directions. We're stopping looking at Egypt behind us, and we're starting to look at the promised land. The chiefs of Edom dismayed. Trembling seizes the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Look at the faith of this song. What's the sign that it will be accomplished? The sign that it will be accomplished is that it will be accomplished. And it will be accomplished in such a way that the people serve God. And we're not yet to the mountain. They'll come to the mountain in a couple of chapters. But they're getting it. They're getting who God is. God is a God of steadfast love, verse 13. A God of justice, the first half of this song. He's a God who rescues, but who will by no means clear the guilty. A God who delivers his people and protects and guides them. And they've seen that, and they've seen it so powerfully that now they're crying out in faith, look out. the rest of this will be fulfilled. I love that sense. Terror and dread fall upon them because of the greatness of your arm. They're getting it. It's not because we're great. It's because he's great. They don't fear a whole bunch of people pulling carts and wagons, or however they did it. They fear the God that we now serve. Yeah. So this is the Song of Moses. I just wanted to pick out some phrases there and show both the mighty hand of God and the response of faith. So if we're asking the question, what's the essence of the covenant of Moses? In seeing the build-up to the actual enacting of the covenant, which comes in 18 to 24, the book of the covenant, what we're seeing is it's directly continuous with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the covenant of promise that we saw there. It's the same God. He's their God, and now he's the God of these people, Moses as their representative. It's if we're asking the question, we're having to see that at its root, it starts with redemption. It starts with salvation out of Egypt. It starts with delivering the people from their oppressor. It starts with a God engaged at the heart, rescuing.
I'm still really, what you were talking about, looking forward to the people of Canaan, the Edom and Moab, which are the tribes that they're going to come in contact with before they cross the Jordan, and then the Canaanites. And in a sense, so you're saying that perhaps this is a looking forward because it's just happened, and there wouldn't have been time for the news. But that's fulfilled because even 40 years later, when Rahab tells the spies why they're afraid of them, she refers back to the Red Sea. Now they've just crossed the Jordan, or they will, I guess.
Yeah.
Which would be impressive enough. But she apparently this event stayed around for a generation and more.
Yeah. It can be head spinning how fast news travels today. Any news that would have traveled in this time would have traveled on foot. This is, I'm going to joke about carrier pigeons, but we're in foot territory here where, it would take a while for news to spread. So this is immediately after Egypt. They're probably still on the shore. Forgive me for saying this, not knowing who's listening, but seeing bodies. They're, in fact, in 14, it talks about them looking back and seeing the bodies and seeing the mighty hand of God in that. And so they're looking forward in faith. I think I'm just watching the time and I'm deciding how I want to do it. The book of the covenant is the way we refer to Exodus 18 to 24. It's where the covenant with Moses is actually formed and shortly after then broken and kind of reconstituted. But there's a lot more to see about the substance from 18 to 24. Excuse me. But I think I'm better suited to pause at this point. So this is its substance. If we'd have looked at it more in detail, we would have seen not just that God invokes the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he continues to evoke circumcision and the rites that we've seen happen. He also is still using the same types of methods to describe himself, and maybe that's where we'll come back to in the midst of it next here. But we have to remember, if we're asking what the essence is, we have to remember rescue comes first. And I say that to begin disarming that landmine of God has changed tactics here and is now going to institute a new method of salvation. Where we saw Abraham, Genesis 15:6, righteous by faith, now we're going to see righteous by law keeping. And we'll dive into that head first next week for sure. But we can already disarm it by seeing that rescue is what God is after. Mm-hmm. Salvation is what he's accomplished. Deliverance that brings worship is what he's done. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that the people go from Moses is going to do something, who are you? To, wow, what is God doing in the midst of this? To, he's done it. Mm-hmm. Look at our God who's overthrown the gods of Egypt.
Just as an administrative note, so you do plan to be
Yeah.
here next week, even if
Yep.
it's Memorial Day.
Is it really?
It really is.
See, Monday feels like Thursday feels like Saturday right now. So, yeah, as far as I know, we're fully intending.
You don't have
on
a
that.
big Memorial Day. Wait a minute.
I might fire up a barbecue.
Let me make sure I'm
We've got a patio that's been needing some barbecue. Is it
It's
2
not
weeks?
Memorial Day.
Okay.
2 weeks.
Got it.
2 weeks. My bad.
Yeah. Next week is the 17th, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be there. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us, guys. And please post any questions that you have. I look forward to continuing. It's important to slow down at Moses because Moses is so pervasive for the rest of the Old Testament and also so often misunderstood that we've got to change speed. Let me pray. Father, thank you that you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even today. Thank you that you are the one who says, I am who I am, and that is your name. Father, thank you for inviting us into relationship with you. In this same manner, you rescue us through your Son, and you welcome us into your people, and we sing your praises. And would you help us as we're doing this kind of dual project, Lord, of surveying and constructing, would you guide us? Would you aid us? Would you help bring the right questions to mind so that we can ask them? Would you help us to see you in the heart of your text, that we might rejoice as the people rejoiced? Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you? Majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, working wonders. There's none like you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.